And welcome Pastor as he comes to bring the word today. Yes?
It's always good to be in God's house. I want to talk to you. This is a serious message, but we will have a little fun later. COVID-19, the stress test. How many have been under a little stress lately? Let me see your hand. Now, if you lie, you die. Today, we live in a society that's fast-paced, to and fro, back and forth, on the go, rat race. If you win the rat race, you just prove that you're the number one rat. Everybody's trying to get in the fast lane. They just can't find the on-ramp. Those that are in the fast lane can't find the off-ramp. We're stressed out, burnt out, wiped out, uptight, about to unravel society. Society is on the verge of a breakdown. Things are changing so fast in our everyday lives, we don't know what to expect next. And we don't know how to handle the change. We can't keep up with it. And change, now listen, change of any kind has a devastating effect on your body, your soul, and your spirit. And then they hit us with all this other stress that's going on every day anyway. Then they hit us with this COVID-19. Shut down. Wear a mask. Wash your hands. Social distancing. No church. No school. Now you got the kids to deal with every day. No work. Lose your job. And you go to the store and there's no toilet paper. We are physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually drained in this country. Psychologists are just now beginning to understand the problems with stress. How do you deal with it? How do you handle the stress, the distress? We're just now beginning to understand the damage that stress does to us physically, to our families, our life. In the Civil War, you go all the way back. Nobody understood it. The Civil War, it was called soldier's heart. In World War I, it was called shell shock. World War II, it was called battle fatigue. Vietnam, it's called post-traumatic stress syndrome. Now, in Afghanistan and Iraq, we have soldiers coming home, men and women, who are messed up spiritually, physically, emotionally. Right now, we have 22 vets a day who are committing suicide because we did not prepare them for what they were going to face, what they were going to see, and what they were going to have to do. And the stress, constant under stress. They did not know who their enemy was, and they did not know what the fight was all about. Why are we here? What are we doing? And then when they came home, they were not psychologically prepared to handle the stress that they had in everyday life on top of the stress they had lived with all that time. Stress, what is it? Stress is when you're faced with the fear factor over and over. When you're faced with that, it's called fight or flight syndrome. When you're faced with that stress, at the moment, there is a chemical called adrenaline that is dumped into your system. And that chemical changes and produces physical, emotional, mental, spiritual consequences when it happens over and over and over. And there's some high-stress professions. Right now, our police force, all of them, they have high-stress situations. You know, they live, most of their day is dull and boring with nothing to do. And then all of a sudden, with that one voice on the radio, and they're faced with a high-stress situation, the adrenaline is pumped into their system. But they're not the only ones. We've discovered that school teachers face a tremendous amount of stress every day. Now we've discovered that preachers, and statistics show that 8 out of 9 preachers are on some kind of mood-altering, tranquilizing drugs. 8 out of 9. My doctor keeps asking me if I need something for anxiety and stress. I said, I do not have anxiety. I cause anxiety. So, what we have found in this COVID-19, we've found that the stress, the alcohol abuse is up 144%. Drug abuse is up. Overdose is up 47% of overdoses of drugs. We've found that the abuse in families, spousal abuse, child abuse, sexual abuse, has risen dramatically. But there are some other top stress producers, like the death of a spouse, divorce, loss of a job, a serious illness in your family. If in an 18-month period you have several high-stress factors take place, there's a 70% chance that within 2 years you will have a health problem. Stress is cumulative. It builds up in your body year after year, week after week, month after month. You go through a high-stress situation, you get through it, and you think, well, I got through that, I made it all right. And then, but you don't understand that it's building up. Builds up, builds up, builds up. And then you're faced with a situation, something happens, and it's like the straw that broke the camel's back. You have a meltdown. You reach the point where, I don't know what's wrong with me. You begin to question yourself and everything you do. You're saying, I should be happy, but I am absolutely miserable. I feel like I'm drowning. I can't keep my head above water. And then it's called, in psychology, it's called the silent scream. On the inside, you're screaming, but nobody can hear you. Okay, now I'm going to shift gears. I've got you all wound up like a 5th string on a banjo. In dealing with stress, there are 2 kinds of personalities. 2 kinds, type A, type B. Now, I know some of you have gone through the color coding and you've got all of these 4 different colors. How many have had color coding? You know your color. Let me see your hand. All right, how many were blue? Okay. How many were yellow? How many were white? How many were red? Oh, how many think you know what mine was? What color mine? Say it. Red. Mine was red and then a deeper shade of red. Said they didn't have one quite shaded and red enough. Type A There's only two types when it comes to dealing with stress. You're either a type A or a type B. Type A, I'm going to give you a test here. You're achievement-oriented. You're time urgency. High expectation of yourself and everybody else. You're impatient, aggressive, competitive. You're frustrated if you fail to meet your goals. You feel guilty if you take a nap or take a day off. You suffer from a disease called hurryitis. Always in a hurry, always in a hurry. I mean, if it's time to change clothes, you find yourself, you're going to the back to change clothes and you're unbuttoning two buttons at the same time, one with each hand. You've got your shirt off by the time you get to the bedroom. How many know how I know that? You're a go-getter. You get the job done. You're the kind of person I like to hire. I like to keep you around me. You can't stand to see people loafing and lollygagging around, nothing to do. And people who are always late drive you up a tree. You would rather be an hour early than to be 5 minutes late. You hate being late. You cannot stand waiting in line. You hate to wait in the doctor's office. They make an appointment, I don't know why. You're impatient. And 80% of the people who have heart attacks are type A's. Type B. If you're a type A, you probably married a type B. Exact opposite. Type B, people-oriented. They love to have fun. They're social butterflies. They just flit around from place to place. They take time to smell the roses, which is fine. But then they want to smell every other flower in the garden. It's not just the roses. Now, if you're type A, you hate to get behind a slow-moving driver. Now, type B, they will drive 25 miles an hour in a 55-mile zone. They'll drive 40 miles an hour in a 70-mile zone, and I wind up being behind them every time. Type Bs, they are more interested in the process of life than they are the product of life. They enjoy the trip, not the destination. They like to stop and shop along the way. How many know how I know that? I see a rummage sale sign, I say, don't look, don't look. Well, I'm not stopping. To me, you leave, you stop to get fuel and go to the bathroom. And then you get on the road. Type B. Oh, there's a Salvation Army store. There's a rummage sale. Let's stop and shop. It's Aesop's fable, the famous tortoise and the hare. Hare's type A. Runs through life. He dashes here, he dashes there. Getting the job done, winning the race. And he usually doesn't live long enough to enjoy the fruits of his labor. Listen, type A's. I'm talking about you and me and us and we. On the rush to the grave, a gold-lined casket is not the goal. Type B, tortoise, come dwaddling along. Pecking here, pecking there, shopping along the way. And one day he comes, meets the hare, belly up from a heart attack. And the tortoise will probably accomplish more in life than the hare because he'll outlive the hare by 30 years. And type B will certainly enjoy the trip a whole lot more. Type A accomplishes more, does more, has more, sees more, and enjoys it less than the type B. But let's move to the next stage. Now that you know who you are and what the end result is, how does stress affect the body, the soul, and the spirit? How does it affect your life personally and your family? How does it affect you? Now, I said body, soul, and spirit. Listen, you need to understand, you are a spirit. You have a soul, which is the mind, the ability to think, to reason, to choose, to make choices. And then you live in a body. So you are a spirit, you have a soul, and you live in a body. So I'm going to deal with all three phases of these on how it affects you, and it won't take long. How does it affect the mind, the soul, the psychological effect? I don't know if you can change personalities or not. I really don't think so. But I think you can make adjustments by simply making a mental effort to change. If you just come to the conclusion that being a type A may not be the smartest thing in the world, that the race is not to the swift, life does not depend on how far you go and how fast you get there. The results is not always the most important thing in the world. All the type A's, we just need to stop every once in a while and say, wait a minute, what am I doing? I need to slow down, relax. Dr. Robert Elliott, first-class cardiologist, wrote a book several years ago. I have the book. 2 rules for coping with stress. Rule number one, don't sweat the small stuff. How many know what rule number 2 is? Tell me rule number 2. It's all small stuff. Everybody say, it's all small stuff. In the light of eternity, church, it's all small stuff. What you worried about last year, you don't even remember today. What stressed you out last week, you probably don't even think about today. It's all small stuff in the light of eternity. As a child of God, you know God loves you. He promised He would never leave you nor forsake you. And He said all things work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to His purpose. All things. You may not like it, yes. You may not like it, you may not understand it, but if you will stop and think, maybe God has a reason for you waiting in the doctor's office. Maybe that traffic jam, the wreck in front of you that stopped you on the freeway for an hour was for a reason. Maybe that sickness, God had a purpose. Can you just stop and think? Maybe God's trying to work something out in my life. Now, it's not stress. It's how we react to stress. People respond to different things in different ways. What bothers me may not bother you at all. I mean, snakes cause me trauma. I do not like snakes. I will kill a snake. I don't care what kind it is. I know there's only 4 kinds that are poisonous, and I'm only afraid of 4 kinds. Big ones, little ones, live ones, and dead ones. Anyway, let's look at how it affects the body. You okay? The physical aspect of stress. I will tell you this much. I'm not going to dwell on it a whole lot, but physical exercise, we do know. Physical exercise drains off the accumulation of stress that builds up in your body. Do something. Walk. If you can't run, walk. If you can't walk but 10 steps, walk your 10 today and set a goal for 11 tomorrow. Get to the point where you can walk 25, 30 minutes a day. If you have to stop and rest along the way, walk. Get up. And if you've got kids that's sitting around playing games on the phone all the time, get them up and take the phone away from them and make them get outside and get some exercise. Stress is serious. It can kill you. Get involved in some exercise, knowing while you're exercising, you're draining off that excess stress that builds up and ties your stomach in knots and causes all kinds of problems, ulcers to heart attacks. It gets worse. Hugs. We now, psychology learned a few years back the importance of a hug. I'm talking about a serious hug. I'm not talking about one of those. Did you ever hug somebody and they go, that's not a hug, that's a roadblock. Stop the traffic. Get out of my space. Just forget it. I'm talking about a serious hug. I'll tell you what, that's why we hug around. You don't like hugs, you probably don't like sheep shed. But it's for a purpose. Psychology has learned one meaningful hug a day reduces your stress level by 40%. 2 meaningful hugs reduces it by 70%, and 3 meaningful hugs will reduce it by 90%. Reduce your stress. I'll tell you what, there needs to be a lot of hugging going on today, everywhere. Number 3, that's the spiritual aspect of stress. Isaiah 26:3 said, God will keep in perfect peace whose mind is stayed on him. John 14:23, Jesus told the disciples, peace I leave with you. My peace I give unto you, not as the world gives. The world cannot give you peace. Try as you may, run from mate to mate, partner to partner, do whatever job to job. You're not going to have peace in this world without Jesus Christ. Amen. He said, I give it to you. It's your right. You should have peace that passeth all understanding. We all need a time of spiritual renewal. Listen to what I'm saying. A time of spiritual renewal. A time of fellowship, a time to reset our clock. You were designed by God to handle 6 days of stress. And then you need a day of rest and spiritual renewal so that you can get your focus and your priorities back in order. God created the heavens and the earth and all that's here in 6 days. On the 7th day, he rested. Do you think you're better than God? Now, I'm talking about rest and renewal, spiritual renewal. That's why you need a church home. You need a church family. You need to be faithful to it. You need spiritual renewal and fellowship because that's what resets your clock for another 6 days of stress. Amen. Now, when I say you need to reset your clock, I'm talking about God said, remember the Sabbath to keep it holy. We keep the Lord's day and we should honor it, not desecrate it. And I think it's getting more and more to the point where we desecrate the Lord's day because we think, well, I'm going to take Sunday and I'm going to go to the lake. I'm going to take Sunday and I'm going to go to Branson. That's not refreshing and that's not stress reducing. You need that spiritual refreshing to reset your clock. Amen. Take time for God and He'll take time for you. I'll just put it simple. The disciples, one occasion, Jesus told them, He said, you take the boat and go to the other side of the Sea of Galilee and I will meet you on the other side. He said, I'm going up on a mountain to pray a while. I'll meet you over there. They get out in the middle of the Sea of Galilee and a storm comes up and they can't make any progress. They rowed, they couldn't make any progress. And they see someone walking on the water and they're afraid they're going to drown. They're scared. They don't know who this is. They didn't even recognize that it was Jesus at first. And an interesting statement in that story. I'm not going to tell you where it is. If you want to know, look it up. Interesting story. Two things about that story. Number one, it said Jesus was walking on the water and He would have passed them by. He would have passed them by. What? They were in a storm and Jesus would have passed them by? Why? Because He didn't tell them to get out in the middle of the sea and stop. Storm or no storm. He said, I'll meet you on the other side. He expected them to be on the other side. So He would have passed them by. Somebody in that boat should have said, wait a minute, guys. He said He'd meet us on the other side. I'm going to the other side if I have to get out and walk. Peter did get out and walk a little bit later. Second thing about that story. They didn't even recognize who Jesus was when they first saw Him. Why? Because they were not expecting Him to show up in the middle of the storm. They expected Him to be on the other side, not out in the storm with them. Now listen. If you're faithful to God, you can expect Him to show up when you're in the middle of a storm. I'm not telling you you won't have a storm. I'm telling you you will have storm. The storms come on the house built on the rock and the house built on the sand. You will have storms in your life. And I'm telling you this, He will show up in the time of the storm if you'll trust Him.